Interesting enough, the probable date for it is 530 AD. Now, a lot of authorities disagree about this date, and it goes up and down depending upon who you read. But most will accept somewhere between 530, 532, but not later. Some go earlier. Now, that's a very interesting date. You see, this entire system started formally with Plato, and he started his academy in Athens at 400 BC. It went on continuously, uninterrupted, until 529, when the Christian emperor Justinian said, look here, we cannot allow these philosophers to perpetuate their teaching. From this point on, there will be no public teaching of philosophy anywhere in the kingdom. And therefore, he closed down the schools where philosophy was part of a public instruction. The aristocrats could study it independently, but no public instruction of Platonic or pagan philosophy was allowed from this point on into Europe, and that brought on the Dark Ages. The people in the academy at that time, because King Croesus of Syria intervened and said, we'll take them. And so the last remaining philosophers in Europe, Platonic philosophers, left Athens and they moved to Syria. Started many interesting things in Syria, which later became a center, by the way, for Islamic thought, and they continued the Platonic tradition there. It also went to Baghdad in the 10th century until the White Huns came down and destroyed it. Then it moved into Islamic thought again and moved into Islamic Spain, where it flourished, and then it was brought partially into Europe in the 12th century, 11th century, 12th century, 13th century in a series of translations. Now look here. I am not interested in dates because of datings. But would you find it curious that they found these texts, Dionysius' text, in Syria at 530? Suppose it turns out that the metaphysics of Dionysius is nothing other than this entire system of Platonic thought introduced into Christianity by various little subtle devices, changing of language here and there. Instead of calling intellect, instead of calling this intelligence, vitality, and being, the realm of the angels. Same dynamics. Instead of talking about the good one, God. But he talks about him in such an interesting way. He defines God, Dionysius defines God as the good. He says God, comma, the good. Most often when he uses it. In his writings, especially in the letters, he brings in all of the basic principles we've been talking here. He brings them in a very fine and wonderful way, because the arguments Dionysius uses turns out to have a one-to-one correspondence with Proclus. Proclus was 470 AD. Now, why would he do that? What's going on, and what sense can we make of it? Now look here. This is rather curious, is it not? Let me offer a couple of suggestions, but before I do that, I want to make two more points here, and then we're going to move into the thought. All right? Lorenzo Valla did two other things that were really quite interesting. He got a copy. You see, in the 15th century, what was happening, everyone anticipated the fact that the last bastion of Greek civilization at Constantinople was about to crumble. The Turks or the Islamics had been trying to conquer that small little area that was still left of the classical age, and they were not able to. But the overwhelming forces were imposing itself upon them for a final attack. And therefore, the Greeks living at that time, they put on boats the best of their scriptures, the best of their writings, their philosophical writings, mathematical writings, their medicine, all of that literature. And they put them on boats and sent them to that great city called Florence and started Plato's Academy once more, called Ficino's Plato Academy. For the first time, Europe got Latin-speaking Europe. They never had it before. They never had Plato before. They never had Plotinus, Proclus, any of this stuff. They had a couple of bastard translations, as they call them, of Plato's dialogue, the Phaedo, a very poor one of the Timaeus. So from 1495 on, Ficino and his school at Florence started a vast translation program, and they turned out work after work translated into Latin, and therefore the first time Europeans, Latin-speaking or Latin-based people, got into classical thought. They didn't have it before. It started then. Valla studied there. All right? Valla studied Greek. That was the thing to get into, because they had been walking around ruins for years and couldn't duplicate even the ruins. Now the thought came back. Now the thought came into Europe, and it woke up Europe, and that was called the Renaissance, which is a misnomer. So they never had a birth before, so they couldn't have a rebirth. That's what Renaissance means. Now, you know what's interesting now, you see, is when this literature came in, they also brought with them early Greek Bibles. Now, the Bible was written in Greek, Old and New Testament, right? Hebrew Bible, what was not intelligible to the vast number of Jews. They all spoke Greek. They didn't speak Hebrew. Hebrew was already a dead language in the 2nd century BC. Therefore, they translated the Septuagint into Greek that early. The New Testament is in Greek. The Latin world, Europe, the Latin world, only had a Latin translation of the Bible called the Vulgate, sometimes called St. Jerome's translation. Lorenzo Valla got a copy of this Greek text, and he wrote his friend Erasmus and said, "We're facing a great crisis. I just compared the Latin, our Bible, the Latin Vulgate edition with the Greek edition, and I have to tell you something terrible," he said. "There's so many differences between the two that we're facing a crisis of the faith." This shocked them so much that they did not publish the findings. They just sent it around in letters to all of the major Renaissance thinkers. So slowly the word got out. Now, Lorenzo Valla did one more thing, and I'd like to add that to the drama. Now, you may be able to draw a better map than I, because I always, for some curious reason, end up drawing Greece much more, bigger and all that than other countries, and I don't know why I do that, but all right. All right. Now look here. The Roman Empire was divided into two parts: the Latin-speaking, the Greek-speaking. Because it was so unmanageable, that's the way they broke it up in the 3rd century. When Emperor Constantine became Emperor of Rome, he saw again and again from past history that the Europeans coming down here, what were the Europeans called in those days? Barbarians, right? They were the barbarians. They were sacking Rome again and again and again, and he looked at the area and he said, "Look here, this is an indefensible place. You can't defend it. Once you break through the Alps, there's no natural defense line." So he came up with a brilliant idea. He said, "You know what we should do? We should move the capital of the Roman Empire." That's the Black Sea, and over here is the Caspian Sea, right? He said, "Let's move the Roman Empire's capital